Beautiful. Thank you. In the late 19th century, Marianne Evans published a little novel, it's actually not little, it's 800 pages, titled Middlemarch, a study of provincial life. She wrote under the male pen name George Eliot to give her work the greatest likelihood of being taken seriously. And although some of the early reviews were mixed, it has come to be seen as a classic. Indeed, quite a few very prominent English writers and literary critics have hailed it as the greatest English novel, period. The greatest. Not too shabby as evaluations of books go. Along these lines, the Guardian newspaper has said that Middlemarch looms above the mid-Victorian literary landscape like a cathedral of words. Virginia Woolf described it as a magnificent book, which, although has its imperfections, is one of the few English novels written for grown-ups. Hermione Lee, the president of Wolfson College, Oxford, called it the most profound, wise, and absorbing of English novels. Presumably, almost any writer would be extraordinarily grateful that one's book has been appraised as such a monumental achievement. Now, keeping in mind the consensus of renowned literary critics that Middlemarch is a classic of world literature, you may or may not agree, I invite you to also consider the other end of the spectrum. I spent a few minutes this past week exploring the anonymous Amazon reviews of readers who rated Middlemarch as worthy of a dismal 1 star out of 5. The following are representative examples of the I hated it reviews. Too long and tedious, great for insomnia. Too many characters, not one main character, so I got bored fast. That one is all in lowercase letters. Their single-minded focus on panning the book could not be distracted from by pesky things like capitalization. Good God, the God is spelled G-H-O-D here, all lowercase again. The author is trying to make her point by bombarding the reader with perpetual pontification. Just make your point and let your readers draw their conclusions. This person may or may not know that Marianne Evans is dead, cannot hear that advice. If it were well written, we might get something from the historical application, but it was not. Two more. I couldn't get through more than a dozen or so pages. They really gave it a shot. The verbiage, spelled without the I, is archaic, and the sentences run on and on and on. And finally, Eliot lacks wit and humor and goes on and on about the most humdrum of details. That review made me want to say, did you notice that the subtitle is a study of provincial life? You were warned. Or as that great wisdom teacher, Billy Madison, once said, at no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to you. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul. But now I'm the one being mean. So, more seriously, what should we make of this wide spectrum of opinion? They're all reading the same novel, after all, but reactions range from essentially the highest possible praise to the most flippant dismissal. One of the takeaways for me is to remind myself that there are billions of human beings on this planet. If you are fortunate to have people love your work and to even have a lot of people love something that you do, at least quite a few people are not only going to hate it, they're going to try to go out of your way to let you know that they hate it. Just know that's going to happen. And even if we know intellectually that that's going to happen, and that it's impossible to please all the people all of the time, the truth is that negative feedback can still be devastating. It turns out that we humans have evolved to have a negativity bias. My favorite metaphor for understanding this dynamic is from a great book by the neuroscientist Rick Hanson titled Buddha's Brain. I know quite a few of you have read it. He says that our brains have evolved to be like Velcro for negative experiences. It just latch right on and stick there until we learn to peel it off. Like Velcro for negative experiences, and like Teflon for positive experiences. Really hard to get those positive experiences to stick. And that negativity bias, it helped us survive when human life was primarily characterized by, as the political philosophers tell us, by continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of humans was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. You know, when there really were a lot of like saber-toothed tigers out to get you, then sort of overcompensating that little rustle in the wind might be the saber-toothed tiger was good. Having that negativity bias helped you survive long enough to pass on your genes and create us. But in many ways, life has gotten better for us Homo sapiens, even if we have a long way to go. The Industrial Revolution, coupled with a sharp decline in threats from starvation, from predators, from disease, is a major reason why the world population of human beings has septupled. It has increased sevenfold from the late 18th century to today, so in just like a little over 2 centuries or so. And while huge problems remain in the past few centuries, our species, now whether this is a good thing or not is the subject of another sermon, but overall our species is thriving, even if we may take the climate down with us. That's another sermon again. For this week, my point is, because of our evolutionarily inherited negativity bias, many of us need a 3-to-1 ratio of positive to negative experiences to counterbalance the ways that our brains fixate on the negative. For instance, if Marianne Evans were alive today, I can easily imagine her thinking, God, it's so amazing that Virginia Woolf loves my book, but I just can't believe that reader 2307, maybe too critical, with 2 being the 2, and a customer, all hated it. And, I want to say, who cares what anonymous internet trolls think, but our brains make it hard for us to forget high, it makes it easy for us to forget high praise, no matter who's saying it, and really easy to fixate on minor criticism, no matter who says it. So what can we do to help interrupt this cycle? I've shared previously about the spiritual practice of savoring. It's one of the simplest and most effective ways of increasing the positive to negative ratio of experiences in your life. Because even, again, small negative experiences tend to linger. Savoring is a way of creating that same impact, overcoming that Teflon factor for positive experiences. So instead of allowing those positive experiences to just slip away like Teflon, slow down. Take a few deep breaths, like Irene was leading us through earlier. And take as little as 5, 10, 20 seconds, if you have it, to really fully notice that positive experience, the way it shows up for you in your body, to just savor it. 5, 10, 20 seconds. That can help overcome that Teflon and help you really experience the power of that positive experience, that good thing that happened to you or someone else. A related technique that I'd like to share with you this morning is called self-compassion. It essentially just means being kind to you, to yourself. And if the sermon leaves you interested in learning more, there's actually a really great book on self-compassion by Kristen Neff, who is an associate professor of human development and culture at the University of Texas and at Austin. It's called Self-Compassion. For those of you who know the incredible work of Dr. Brene Brown and what she's done around vulnerability and courage, Dr. Neff is doing that same kind of work around self-compassion, showing us what does social science data show us about how this works and how we can best cultivate it and use it skillfully. So being kind to yourself helps both overcome our brain's negativity bias as well as to grow our capacity to be kind to ourselves and others. And as we saw in our opening example of Middlemarch, since there is no guarantee that others will be kind to us, we can start by laying that foundation, again, as Irene was talking about, of being kind to ourselves. Dr. Neff's book is filled with many more exercises on self-compassion that I will have time to go into this morning. And if you really want to go deeper, she's co-developed a 10-week online course on mindful self-compassion that's very much in conversation with Buddhist practices. For now, in line with that finding that we need kind of this 3-to-1 ratio of positive to negative experiences to overcome our brains, the ways our brains are like Velcro for negative experiences, I'll share with you just 3 ways of practicing self-compassion. The first can seem a bit silly, but here's the thing, it works. I invite you to try it with me. Give yourself a hug, right now. Wrap your arms around yourself, maybe close your eyes, kind of feel that in your body. Take a deep breath again. Feel that hug and let it go. You can stay there if you need to. And don't get me wrong, getting a hug from someone else, that's great too, but fascinatingly, science shows us that our bodies don't think that self-hugs are silly. Physiologically, our bodies respond to that stimulus of warmth and care, irrespective of whether it is someone else's arms or our own arms wrapping around us. Our skin is this incredibly sensitive organ. Physical touch, it releases oxytocin, good drugs, right? Provides a sense of security, it soothes our distressing emotions, and it calms cardiovascular stress. If you're feeling stressed, you're feeling alarmed, you can give yourself a hug. Try it again right now, if you'd like. A second way of practicing self-compassion is reframing. If you find yourself having trouble being compassionate towards yourself in a given situation, that self-hug is just not cutting it, or you're in a place where this is going to look kind of weird, you can, in your head, reframe something. And what that means is imagining what a very compassionate friend would say to you. Sometimes we're just so beating ourselves up about something that's going on and we just can't get to that self-compassion place. Imagine what would a compassionate friend say to me, or what would I say if I were in a good place and not stressed to a friend who is in a similar situation. That can help kind of unlock how you might reframe this. And since we've already entered into the territory of silly things that nevertheless work, I will add another pro tip from Dr. Neff, is to experiment with adding a term of endearment to your compassionate self-talk. So say to yourself, self, darling, honey, sugar lump, whatever you're into. Whatever you know works. It's just between you and you. You know you haven't gotten much sleep the last few nights, and you've had so many stressful deadlines to meet recently, and X has had so much going on, or whatever is the case. Be gentle with yourself. So in addition to giving yourself a hug, in addition to imagining what a compassionate friend might say to you in a given situation, or what you might say to a compassionate friend in a parallel situation, a third way of practicing self-compassion is to memorize a mantra. And if you're not into memorization, if that's going to lead to you beating yourself up because you forgot the mantra, write it down on a card or put it in your smartphone, whatever works for you. Dr. Neff shares that whenever she notices something about herself that she doesn't like, whenever something has gone wrong in her life, or she's fallen into beating herself up again, she silently repeats this mantra. This is what works for her. She's glad for you to use it, but you can also tweak it, use your own. This is hers. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I give myself the compassion that I need. Note that this mantra reminds her not only of her intention, so it resets that intention to practice self-compassion. May I be kind to myself in this moment. But it also reminds her that her suffering will pass. This is a moment of suffering or pain. And it also reminds her that her suffering is not unique. Suffering is a part of life. Reminding ourselves that all human beings have painful moments or have moments of suffering reminds us that we're not alone. And it can really be this moment of connection that whereas when we're beating ourselves up, we're often isolating ourselves, either physically or mentally. Now, of course, all of this is, of course, easier said than done. Neff confesses that even after many years of practice, this is like her thing, right, for many years now. She certainly doesn't perfectly practice what she preaches. Our brain's negativity bias is strong, but we can make strides towards achieving more balance through practices like savoring and self-compassion. And I would be remiss if I failed to share that the single most perverse thing about practicing self-compassion is that you can find yourself being harsh with yourself for failing to practice self-compassion. Why do you suck so much at being self-compassionate, right? Like that kind of... So at whatever point you wake up and notice that you have ironically spiraled into negative self-talk about failing to be compassionate with yourself, gently give yourself a hug, or reframe, imagine what a compassionate friend would say to yourself, or repeat your mantra. This is a moment of suffering that I've created for myself. Suffering is part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I give myself the compassion that I need. As the saying goes, practice doesn't make perfect, but practice tends to make more permanent. We tend to inculcate, to make deeper the grooves, as again, another saying in neuroscience is that the neurons that fire together wire together, right? So that as you begin to make this more and more second nature. So as we become, practice self-compassion more and more, overcome that 3-to-1 bias against having positive experiences, may we be increasingly intentional about practicing self-compassion and compassion for others. May compassion for ourselves, may compassion for all sentient beings become increasingly second nature for us all. In that spirit, please rise and embody your spirit. Let's sing together hymn 1050.